So the spending spree for the presidency of the United States has begun. You can make a case that it had already begun long before, and at the very least in the minds of the various contestants, I would say it was already there, whether or not the monies had been distributed or not. But in earnest, with Joe Biden being, for all intents and purposes, the presumptive nominee, well, at this point, now the money is coming out. In April, Joe Biden raised $60 million. Now, this was beaten once again by the Republicans, who was able to raise $61.7 million. That said, Joe Biden has expanded his victory fund, or they've just filed over the weekend the Biden Victory Fund. From the standpoint of the money at cash on hand, the Republican Party has $250 million cash on hand, if I'm not mistaken. That is $255 million cash on hand. Right, that's $187 million more in the bank than the Democratic Party. Meaning Biden is starting off at a financial disadvantage. The president of the United States has a bully pulpit. He also has control over the parties and all of that other stuff, meaning he can do that long before Biden was able to get around to doing that. Nevertheless, Joe Biden has now, and the DNC has now opened up the faucets in order to raise as much money as possible for Biden. The spending spree for the presidency has begun. Do you remember back during 2016 when Hillary Clinton's Victory Fund started? Now, Hillary Clinton had argued that she was going to use that victory fund in order to rebuild the Democratic Party because during the time of Obama, Obama was basically draining money from the organization in order to win his presidential election. So Hillary Clinton, who basically has the Democratic Party on an allowance, just based on Donna Brazile, you can read it for yourself, was basically funneling 98 to 99% of that money back to her. So despite saying she was going to rebuild the party, the Victory Fund is basically an agreement between the campaign of whatever that candidate is, be it Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, and let's say 20 something or 30 other parties. I think Hillary Clinton had 32 other state parties. Well, in Joe Biden's case, he has 26 state parties. And so Joe Biden will be able to raise, what, 400? So typically, Joe Biden can get $5,600, but with the Victory Fund, he will be able to raise $620,000. I'm sorry, $620,600 from his supporters. Because again, instead of giving it to one candidate, it's almost as if you're giving it to the 32 or 26 state parties that he is affiliated with. Now, whether or not he spends that money on state parties is a secondary thing. Hillary Clinton already set the precedent of having that money being rewired back to her campaign, despite that money being supposedly for all of the state parties. I suppose this is like M&Ms. If you have a mixed bag of M&Ms, you find one black M&M and everything else is red, technically you have a mixed bag of M&Ms. But that clearly destroys the spirit of it. I suppose the money is used in any way the money needs to be used. But in this very specific case, the Biden Victory Fund has now just been established, and his donors can give 110 times more than they would typically give to an individual candidate. Like I said, the buying spree has begun. Joe Biden was already courting big money donors. Now, the catch becomes, in the COVID crisis, he can't necessarily have these meetings where he would typically engage with all of these people who are basically stuffing money in his G-string. So they've been trying to have virtual meetings and virtual conversations. And of course, there'll be phone calls and all of these other things from his donors that take place behind the scenes. The buying of the presidency, our annual ritual. Well, every 4 years anyway. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal patron. I have basically dozed off all day, and so I am wide awake going into the night. I told you guys I conk out at some point after being up for a few days. So let's do the news. As I said, the Biden Victory Fund has been filed, so Biden can now pull over $600,000 ahead. And in addition to the Biden Victory Fund, Joe Biden has been joined by another ally, another person who is basically a mega donor that is going to donate money to the Democratic Party all up and down the ballot, but is also going to give a shitload of money to one Joe Biden to try to get him over the finish line. You remember? this guy.
Now, to fill you in a little bit, Joe, this group that you're going to address has come together like this every Thursday for the past 9 weeks. We created this program to empower and give voices to mayors and to make sure that their voices are heard. We've also had, Joe, quite a few special guests join us, including Presidents Bush, Clinton, and Obama, as well as Speaker Pelosi, Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, and Bill Gates. In each session, experts in public health and management share the latest information and guidance, and mayors have the opportunity to ask questions about how they can apply these things in their cities.
And I know this is a really anxious time, and I hope...
Yes. Billionaire, many times over, Michael Bloomberg. Bloomberg has $60 billion, if I'm not mistaken, and Bloomberg has now joined the race. Bloomberg spent $1 billion in the primary when he believed that Joe Biden was going to lose. That is dramatically important for people to understand. Bloomberg only got into the race because he thought Sanders was going to run away with it. If you remember, Bloomberg gave Joe Biden the first 3 or 4 states. Now, the thought was if Joe Biden can't show himself to be winning, or at the very least being able to put up a real competition within those 3 or 4 states, that Bloomberg was going to jump in, especially if it looks like Sanders was going to run away with it. Bloomberg did just that. Jumped into the race, spent $1 billion, got embarrassed on 2 debate stages, went out with his tail between his legs. Which becomes, Bloomberg could live with Trump in that White House. Bloomberg just doesn't like Trump. There's a difference in those things. Joe Biden is the person that Bloomberg is basically supporting to do that. And Bloomberg, with more money than God, and who spent $1 billion in the primary, you can imagine how much money Bloomberg could put to this organization or the various organizations. Meaning Bloomberg, in addition to funding all of these Democrats up and down the ticket, and I would ask lefties, what kind of Democrats do you think Bloomberg are going to be backing, will be backing? But on top of that, he can dump money into the Biden Victory Fund. He can dump money into the super PACs that are supporting Joe Biden, either Progressive USA. Hell, he can donate money into the Jeff Weaver Victory Fund that is trying to get lefties and con men into voting for one Joe Biden. Bloomberg has so much money that he can put that money in all of these various sources. And don't believe for a minute that that money doesn't necessarily bring back dividends in regards to policy concessions that Joe Biden or these other Democrats are willing to give in order to get that cash, including Stacey Abrams. I'm just going to read this. The former New York mayor and his closest political advisors are discussing whether Bloomberg's expenditure will include major donations from pro-Biden PACs, super PACs, by a joint fundraising agreement with the Democratic National Committee or other independent groups, according to people familiar with the conversations. These people declined to comment because the talks were private. There are at least 3 super PACs backing Joe Biden that Bloomberg could give money to: Unite the Country, Priorities USA, and American Bridge. Donors can give unlimited funds to super PACs, but are limited in how much they can give to campaigns or joint fundraising committees. So at one point, Bloomberg said he could spend up to $1 billion in order to beat Trump. Now, the people who are backing Trump said they're willing to spend $1 billion also to back Trump. But consider for the moment. I would imagine that Bloomberg or Trump has billionaires that are backing him also. But basically, that's just one guy. That's just one guy. I'm making the point that they are basically buying the presidency, whether that's Bloomberg or whether that's the people who are backing Trump. This is basically money being dumped into the presidency. If you are curious as to why you can have a situation of having 70% that want Medicare for all, and the Democratic Party would be like, yeah, no, we're going to donate money to Cobra, something that's nowhere near as popular as Medicare for all. And again, anybody that has used Cobra, there's no way you can tell me that you like Cobra. I'm pretty sure there's some percentage, so don't misunderstand me. I'm just making the very basic point that 88% of Democrats back a policy that the Democratic Party refuses to back and refuses to support. Joe Biden, who is claiming to put out a fig leaf to the left or a handout to the left, is also unwilling to back a policy that 88% of Democrats back while running in the Democratic primary. I am pointing out to you that the reason that you can't get this Green New Deal, despite the population being on board for it, the reason you can't get the increase in minimum wage, the reason you can't get the strengthening of the unions, the reason you can't get a wealth tax or a universal elimination of student debt has everything to do with this. They know where the bread is buttered. 90% of the elections are won by the side with the most cash. That's different from the presidency, but from the standpoint of congressional races, that is amply true. If you know that, if you're a politician, regardless of whatever your priorities are, if you know that 90% are won by the side with the most cash, especially in the way that they typically do politics, where cash is the only thing a part of the process, you lean to the side with the cash. It's uber rational. Whatever you think from a moral standpoint, or for whatever you think of a philosophical point of politics standpoint, or a philosophical point of politician or our government, the reality is the incentives that are built into our process have these guys leaning in the direction of the people who are giving them millions, or in this case, billions of dollars. So understand, it's not just the money going into the person's pocket. It's not just the money going for their opposition that may even incentivize their actions. It's also this notion of, yes, super PACs, but favors after the fact. Lobbying jobs, corporate jobs, this kind of revolving door in regards to politics. People who play along will get bonuses and incentives for that playing along, as opposed to people who have an ideologically rigid stance against leaning in the direction of that cash. You don't have to take that cash. You can run a race that's somewhat populist that brings the public into your sphere of influence. I mean, think of the way Sanders ran that race. He had more money than pretty much anybody else that was running against him. But the difference is you have to be willing to support various policies that the public is in favor of, and not just willing to support those policies that the public is in favor of. You have to do it. You have to be strong about it. And the public has to actually believe you're an authentic actor in that process. So the question basically is for lefties. Do you think this will be a beneficial process if Joe Biden wins the election, basically being bought off to the tunes of billions of dollars? And do you think he's going to turn around and do any of the quote unquote lefty priorities that he never really said he was going to do anyway? Again, the same process of putting somebody in that office for who he is not, as opposed to who he is, something that has taken place over the last 40 years. And again, the question for lefties, are you going to go along with it? Again, you finally got a policy where the overwhelming majority of Democrats back, the overwhelming majority of the public backs, and the person who the Democratic Party is choosing does not. As a lefty, are you finally to the point where you realize that what you want doesn't get accomplished in the party? And for you to have some level of a dog in the hunt or some level of political leverage, you have to be willing to stand under policy, even if it's just one policy. Even if you say, look, the other ones are too much, but 88% approval, yes, they should back that, fine. But to be willing to stand under that particular policy unmoved until they support it, and if they're not willing to support it, being willing to let them loose. Until you do that, even with a policy with 88% approval, you will not be able to demonstrate and show any level of leverage in the political process. The buying of the presidency has started. The question is, what does the left do? Like, share, subscribe.